Hello, and welcome to the show Goldsquadrongays. It's the podcast where two Star Wars loving gays break down each episode of their favorite Star Wars TV shows while also being gay as hell. I'm your host, Bradley Brower.
I'm your other host, Charles Rogers, and today we are joined by...
Aeron Llewellyn.
Aeron is a long-time guest on the show. You were on, like, episode 6 or 7 that we ever did of this show.
Oh my god, I'm gonna have to go actually look at it real quick because
you want to look and find out which.
Yeah, because I'm curious which episode you were on. I know it was Mandalorian. I just don't remember which.
It was Mandalorian. It had to be one with Grief Karga in it.
I think it was the second to last one of the first season.
Well, while Bradley's looking up which episode you were on, Aeron, do you want to tell the people who you are?
Who am I? I am a recovering history major. I've been since rehabilitated into the normal population. I work as a receptionist now, but I used to be a history major, and that's why I'm here now. I think that's my understanding.
Well, I genuinely enjoy the pleasure of your company and the conversation.
Oh yeah, friendship.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Also, I am totally using you for your history degree right now.
I've never felt so much pressure since I wrote my thesis.
Well, today we're going to be doing our retrospective. By the way, Bradley, before I segue, did you figure out what episode she's on?
Yes. So you first appeared on season 1, episode 7 review, and then of The Mandalorian, and then you also were on. It looks like season 2, episode 3. So if anybody wants to go back and listen to your classic episodes where you get into all kinds of shenanigans with us, just go back and listen to those 2 episodes.
Bradley, are you trying to drive traffic back to our older episodes? Because I fucking hate it when you do that.
If you guys want stuff from a year ago, this is where...
And here's the thing. My degree was in American history, and Mandalorian season 1, season 2, lots of drawing on just the Wild West in general. That's really like the stuff that I studied was Western history and such. And today's episode is going to revolve mostly around the stuff that I study for fun.
Okay.
Which is it's not good stuff. I have problems.
Well, I knew because I'm actually friends with you, and we're in a group chat with Jordan, who is the artist who does the artwork for our TikToks, and we will frequently annoy her by talking about history for extended periods of time, and she'll just be sitting there like, "Okay, guys, that's great. I now know more about Nicholas II than I ever wanted to."
Jordan has put up with so much from me over the last decade, yeah. It's always I get in her car and I'm like, so you want to hear about a weird cult?
Now, are we getting Nicholas II today? Does he come up?
I mean, he's gonna come up by way of his eventual death in a basement. I mean, we're talking about people who are trying to get everyone together to end an empire. That's the goal here, is everyone involved can agree on one thing, other than our antagonists, obviously. They can agree on one thing. The current system has to end, and that's the one thing they can agree on, which was what was going on at the fall of Imperial Russia, and which is why I think it's one of the best comparisons one can make. And so, spoiler alert, Emperor dies at the end.
Wow, spoilers for a movie that came out in 1983. Real history. Spoilers for the fucking...
Russian Revolution.
The
spoilers
dies.
For the Romanovs. Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Well, before we get into that, what we're going to do, because I've been trying to get Aeron on the show literally the entire time for Andor, because I'll watch an episode and be like, oh, there's some fun history stuff that I'm not going to talk about in our episode that I want to get Aeron to talk about. Let me get her on this one. Oh, but the next one also has some fun history stuff. And about halfway through, I was like, we're just going to get Aeron on the retrospective. So we're going to split this episode in half. The first half of it, the three of us are going to talk about our overall impressions of the series. And then we're going to pivot to ad. And when we get back from the ad break, Aeron is going to teach us about some of the history of Andor season 1. Bradley, you wanna ease us into talking about the show overall, which I binged over the course of the last 2 days.
See, that's very brave of you, because I would have probably been too depressed to watch the whole thing as a whole this weekend. But
I like pain, and I'm already depressed all of the time.
Okay, here's the thing. About a few weeks back, I was like, they're getting close to the end of Andor. I don't know if they want to have me on. And I wasn't keeping up with it because it was getting me depressed. And so in the last week, I caught up from episode 7 forward in a week. And I'm feeling some kind of way.
Imagine
I'm feeling some kind of way.
No, because I remember when
I'm so glad I didn't. I'm so glad that I didn't. I would have lost the track of so much.
The prison arc in particular, the Narkina 5 arc. I remember because I was talking to people and it was really depressing.
Yeah.
Because people would come out of those episodes and be like, man, that was a really good episode, but I'm just upset now.
Yeah.
Especially the end of episode, what is this? The second to last episode, the one where they find out nobody's getting out. And it's just like,
yeah, nobody's listening.
Nobody's listening. Okay. Bradley, you wanna take us into asking us about Andor, or do you even just want to start with some thoughts on Andor? I don't know how you want to run this segment. I'm leaving this one up to you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess so. If you haven't already guessed by now, we're talking about season 1 of Andor that just completed, and we're gonna be just kind of, I guess we'll just kind of go through it, kind of arc by arc, because this show had a kind of funny format that most of the other shows don't really follow. With Mandalorian, it's kind of I don't like using Monster of the Week with Mandalorian because there's no actual monster
it's episodic.
of the week, but it's episodic.
It's episodic.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Kenobi was kind of more just like a 6-part to one giant episode, essentially. And then, Book of Boba was kind of like the bookend of Mandalorian season 2. It wasn't really like its own show. We'll probably
I don't know what the Book of Boba Fett was.
It was its own thing, right?
That was sorry.
Good question. What was the Book of Boba Fett?
The Book of Boba Fett was a choice.
Sure,
put it that way.
All that to say, this show kind of had a fun format to where they decided to do arcs, kind of like Clone Wars, very reminiscent of that, to where there were chunks of episodes that kind of all went together, and then they connected to the overall arcing story overall, but they kind of focused heavily on either one location or kind of more one storyline at a time. I guess we can kind of just talk about the first arc, which we'll just call the pilot arc, because it's just kind of introducing all the characters and kind of putting our main character of Cassian, on his path to rebellion.
It's really the mini series that kind of launches the show.
It really did feel like a little mini series, or like an extended pilot of some kind. Like, I don't know, it was really cool. It was like a mini movie, honestly.
Well, because I remember we were supposed to get episodes 1 and 2, and then they pushed it back 2 weeks and they dropped all 3. And we were like, why are they dropping all 3 of these episodes? This doesn't make sense. And then we watched them and it was like, oh, these aren't so much episodes of TV as it is somebody's just chopped an hour-and-a-half movie up into 3 parts.
And I get the feeling that the writers were, I probably should have looked up more about the writing process, but you really get the feeling that the writers were like, oh, there's so much here. We need to, how do we get this across? How do we deliver that? Like, this is a show that is like the presentation. A lot of it is, how do you deliver this in a way that people will watch it and it will make sense, and you can really curate the process of how someone watches it so that you can get across the story you want to all at once. This was an interestingly delivered show.
Yeah, and talking about the interesting delivery of it too, like, we sort of knew it was going to be arcs. It did kind of like jerk off. That is a very poor 2 words.
Just try that again.
Where are you going with this, buddy?
I know we're an X-rated show, Charles, but I mean, come on.
I did not sign on for this.
Not with Aeron here. Good Lord.
No.
I am more respectful of my friends than that. It kind of jumped off the rails a little bit by episode 7, kind of throwing things off track. So I know we all sort of expected it to be 3, 3, 3, 3, because we also know season 2 is going to be 3, 3, 3, 3. Whereas this one, but when I went back, because I binged it all over the course of the last day and a half, like I mentioned. And one thing about it was that watching it on the binge, the back half of it flows so well, one after another. Yeah. Like, it almost doesn't feel like the Narkina 5 arc is a separate arc, but a smaller part of this broad 6-episode arc, because of the way all the scenes kind of flow into each other. Particularly like, you know, Cassian getting arrested at the end of episode 7 and then going to the prison, then gets out of the prison, and the episode 11 is like right after their escape. It all just flows together really, really well on the binge. Like I've said before that this show feels like it was written to be binged rather than written to watch week to week. And when I binged it, I was like 100% yes. This is exactly what I meant.
Absolutely. And I know that a lot of the writers are from like House of Cards, right?
Beau Willimon, the guy who created the American House of Cards, wrote the Narkina 5 arc.
That's a show that's also meant to be binged. Like, you don't, at least when I was trying to watch House of Cards and eventually gave up, I would have found it deeply confusing had it aired week to week.
Yeah, because it was kind of one of the first ones to pioneer that streaming model where you would drop. It was that one and Orange is the New Black that really like pioneered the idea of let's drop all the episodes from the season at once.
Yep.
Right.
And that's been a thing that we've just had to deal with.
Could you see them doing that in the future? Like with Star Wars, or you think that they just love the whole let's keep people talking about it?
I think they love the let's keep people talking about it too much. I think that, and I've had this argument with Chris from Dark Side Divas before, is that, you know, the reason they don't drop it all, who's still talking about Tales of the Jedi?
Exactly.
Who's still talking about Tales of the Jedi? That had one drop. We talked about it for about 2 weeks, and that's just disappeared. And that's why they don't do it, because they can.
And that's why we're gonna bring it back for all of you.
We are gonna bring it back, so I can bitch about Tales of the Jedi.
Right. Merry Christmas, mother.
Bradley, what did you think overall the first arc in the context of the whole show, and then we'll kind of move on.
So I think with the first arc, I love that I feel like they introduced everybody perfectly. We kind of, the show did what it was supposed to do, right? It was supposed to give it, because this is such a giant cast of characters, and the past couple shows haven't had such a large cast. They've usually focused on one or two kind of main people and then kind of stayed on those, and there's a few supporting people in the background. This show is like, no, all these background people, I put that in air quotes, are very important, and they're not background people, because they're barely supporting characters, because they almost are just as important as Cassian is in the broader scope of the show. And so that's why I like what they did. They were like, hey, here's Bix, here's Marva, here's all these different characters, and they were like, they're very important, you need to know who they are. And by the end of the third episode, we know who everybody in the show is, minus like I'll call our one cameo, we'll call him
it's I'd say by the end of episode 4 we know who all the important people are, because that's the episode we meet Mon, Clea, Edie, Deidre.
Oh, that's right. Wait, they're not in the. You're right. They're not in the.
They're not in the first 3.
And that's that's
so weird.
That's also the point where Andor leaves the planet, right?
Yeah, leaves Ferrix.
And the story becomes bigger than the planet. It's more than just Ferrix.
I hadn't even realized. That's why they waited to introduce Mon Mothma till episode 4.
Because it wouldn't have made sense to introduce her early on, because she's not in the zeitgeist yet. Like, it doesn't make sense to have her there. Yeah. Okay.
Well, speaking of Aldhani, what do we think of in the grand context? What do we think of the Aldhani arc, the second batch of 3 episodes?
Man, oh boy. Oh boy.
Bradley, what about you? While Aaron thinks about this, why don't you tell us what you thought about Aldhani in the broader context?
I really liked Aldhani because they kind of did a separate thing with the Aldhani episodes, right? Like the first arc was like, hey, here's most of the characters, right? These are the important people, the players of the show. Then they were like, okay, let's do something, right? Let's have like some kind of conflict, some kind of thing that we need Cassian to do. And that was the heist, right? So they built up this heist for the next 3 episodes. And I was like, okay, that's great, because that'll eventually lead into repercussions of the heist, which is the following, 3. So it's, I don't know, they did it. I think it's weird to break it down in structure because you're just like, it's so weird to think of it so blatantly as like introduction of characters arc. Cassian needs to do something arc. Cassian needs to pay for something arc. Cassian changes his character arc. Like there's so many, like I love the way that they do
Cassian
it.
discovers the prison industrial labor complex.
Right. It's very important to his character.
Every arc of this one season could be a whole different show. It could just be a show on its own or a movie on its own.
Well, that's a good point, because if you think about it, the show takes place 5 years before Rogue One, right? So, or the Battle of Yavin. And so it's weird because you theoretically you could do this show as each year is a season, and they could have done 5 seasons. So I'm gonna blow your
fucking mind here, Bradley. That was the original plan.
Really?
That's not even a speculation. I could just flatly tell you. So what happened is they originally were going to do 5 seasons for the show. They were going to do 1 season per year because they were kind of talking about how Andor, they have 5 seasons planned, et cetera, et cetera. They shot the first season, and Tony Gilroy basically was like, 1, we don't want to spend the next 12 years of our lives making this show. 2, this show is really hard to make, not just for us above the line, but for all of the people who are involved. So we're gonna basically the second season's gonna cover the next 4 years. So each 3 episode block of season 2 is going to be another year closer. So it's almost kind of forming a trilogy, with season 1 is the first installment, season 2 is the middle installment leading up to Rogue One, which is the finale.
I don't know if I like that.
We'll have to see it. We'll have to see how it plays out in practice. I'm grappling with it myself because I'm curious how they're going to pay off all these things that they've set up in the first season.
Right. I feel like
only 12 episodes.
For me, 3 seasons is a magic number, right? Like that kind of seems to be the new model of shows, is 3 seasons, because it's not too long and it's not too short, right? Right. It's great. It's a nice round number. I like
3. It's organic. It's not like perfectly symmetrical. It feels balanced.
Right. And it's right when you need to get out of the story, because if we look at the past, like Shrek the Third, he's got kids, and then you're just getting out when you need to.
You really defaulted immediately to Shrek. You immediately went to Shrek. Oh my God.
Please join us next week on our episode of Shrek Podcast. I'm just kidding.
Days with layers. Aeron, what did you think of the Aldhani arc in the broader context? Because you were still watching week to week during the Aldhani arc, I think.
I was watching week to week, and at that time, I was really seeing this going more of a heist movie type of way. Like I wasn't expecting the prison system to come into it the way it did. I sort of thought with the way it was going, like, okay, he's going to get recruited into the rebellion by being the guy who can do all this sneaky behind the scenes, do some stealing, do some robbing, make some money for the rebellion, yada yada. But no, he's not convinced yet, and it's a tenuous relationship what they have going on there. And I love a heist movie. They're so good. I love it. I love to see a bunch of people working together as a team and getting something done and successfully robbing a casino, for example.
I was just about to say Oceans. It's Oceans of Star Wars.
Oh my God. Ocean 7, a Star Wars story.
Yeah.
Oh God, it's Luthen 7.
Yeah. There's outfits. People dress up. People play roles. There's feints. You've got a guy on the inside. It's all good. It's all good stuff. I love that stuff. It's so fun to watch. As I was watching, I very quickly realized, of course, by the time the eye of watching The Eye, that's when I was very much like, okay, this isn't a fun heist movie. Okay, nope, this isn't Ocean's 11. Okay, that's fine too. And then I think at that point, you linked me to an interview with the showrunner saying, oh yeah, this was directly inspired by a bank heist by Joseph Stalin, when he was a young man, still raising money for the
Hey, we're at 25 minutes raw recording and Joseph Stalin is showing up.
Yep. J
Stall's here.
Whoa. Hate it.
Anyway, sorry. Continue your. Yeah, I remember actually linking you that article where he talked about it was based on the early bank robbing that that
It
Joseph
all-
Stalin did.
Well, as far as I know, I know about the one bank, but yeah, there was more than one bank. Listen, I started reading Young Stalin by Simon Montefiore, and I did not finish. I don't have that much time in my day, but boy, oh boy, a lot going on there. Because here's the thing, you kind of need money to do a rebellion. They need money. It's important stuff.
And Mon Mothma can't just pay for everything.
She
from
can't just
her
pay for
unlimited
everything.
bank account.
No, apparently bank accounts on Chandrilla aren't completely unlimited. They don't have bottomless bottom.
Bottomless bottoms.
I don't like. Listen, I
Look, Bradley, it's the title of your new memoir.
Bottomless bottoms
Bottomless
on
bottoms.
Sunday.
I'd like to apologize.
You should in no way feel like you need to apologize for that.
Mostly the Aldani arc. The Aldani arc was when I started just going full galaxy brain on, oh, this is referencing so many things that have happened in all of human history. Let's start, the Highland clearances, obviously. And empires. Fuck, empires.
Because we were having that chat like as far back as then. Because I remember looking at it, I was like, these are some deliberate choices that are being made in the costuming, and we'll get to the history part of it a little bit later on. But this was a point where it really became clear that like, oh no, they're doing some like they're making some points here. They have some points to make. Yeah, I binge watched it. When I binge watched it back, because I watched the first 3 episodes last night, and then I got up this morning and I just started with Aldani, and I've been watching all day, which I've just confessed to on air instead of making the TikTok that I was supposed to be making today. I see that look you're giving me, Bradley.
God damn it, Charles.
I know, right? I can't even keep up with the basic podcast obligations that I have to do. No, I watched it back, and it really does play out like an Ocean's movie. If you watch all 3 episodes in a row, like it really plays out with a lot of those same beats. And I remember we talked about Bradley when it first aired, when we were going week to week, and we were like surprised by episode 2 how they don't do anything to actually perform the heist in episode 2. 2 is just moving into position, but if you watch all 3 together, it flows absolutely perfectly one into each other, and there's this great sense of binge watching it all together of just how much of a one thing to another it is with Cassian. Like, he gets into the fight on Morlana 1, and then basically everything continues to spiral out of control for him for the next 12 episodes. And Aldani, really fun to watch all of that together, especially after having watched it week to week and already being able to pick up on, smaller details and things that we already knew from watching it. So that was interesting. And then it moved us into announcement. Did you want to take announcement by itself, Bradley?
I was going to say, they just decided to change the format completely and just say, you know what, here's a standalone Coruscant episode, basically.
They went on spring break. They went to Space Florida.
No,
yeah, right?
Now, is it Space Miami or Space Panama City Beach? Because everyone has called it Space Miami.
I want to say Space Miami.
But I've been calling it Space Panama City Beach.
As I was watching it, I said like out loud, "Oh, we doing a Miami Vice type thing, or is this is Miami, right?" Okay. And my cultural touchstone on this side of the where I live would be California, because I've never been to the East Coast.
I was gonna say it's more like Space Panhandle.
Yeah,
Florida. Just wherever
there's a
you want to go.
There's a seediness
there's an
I just
there
don't.
I worked in Santa Monica for a year, and I was a block away from a park that you could look out over the beach. I'm so mad that contract ended. I fucking loved working on the beach. It was the best. But there's a certain seediness that I wouldn't say even the Santa Monica Pier had.
Florida man energy.
Truly, Cassian Andor, canonical Florida man.
Oh no.
Right.
Oh no.
No, I thought it was an interesting choice to like. But again, you watch it in like one after another, and it just leads into Narkina 5 so well. Like It's this transitionary episode into Narkina 5 that ends up paying off too, what with Cassian having come back and all of that. and talking to Bix, and all that ends up becoming important. It's not just random. And like it's super fucking heartbreaking to watch because like you find out that's the last time he ever saw or spoke to his mom.
Yeah.
Ow. And then
I was watching it, I was just like, oh, okay, this is gonna be I have a bad feeling about this.
And hey, she said the thing.
I said the thing, and it turned out to be right. God, that everything about that scene together with them. You're gonna worry, but that's just love. I'm gonna worry, but that's just love. That one, like, okay, I that was when I started tearing up. I'm like, okay, fucking writers, they're getting me. They're getting me.
I was gonna ask who wrote that episode.
Which one? 7?
Episode 7.
Stephen Schiff.
Fuck you, Stephen Schiff, for your good writing.
Right.
Dare you hurt me in this way?
Yeah, because what did you think of announcement, Bradley? I'll ask this before we jump into Narkina 5.
Well, actually, I'm like, I have all the episodes up, right? Because I'm looking at the different titles and who writes them and which ones they aired. But I'm looking at like the summary of each episode, and I'm like, it's weird. They set up so much stuff in this episode for the finale. So like, they set up a bunch of stuff for the finale, and then we take a break and do the prison arc. So it's really interesting how they did that, because as I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, they introduce like Tacoma, they introduce, the banking stuff, they introduce like all this stuff. Like, it's really interesting.
But what you say about how the way it all calls back to each other along the way. Our final episode, we see a literal like band coming together and putting together all these musical leitmotifs together, and it all flows together in the exact same way. It is like watching an orchestral performance. All these separate parts that come together to create a whole that is it's a intricately woven tapestry. And it reminds me of how you would craft a huge musical piece. Like, it all has to be taken into consideration together. And in a musical piece like that, made for an orchestra, you do not have extraneous parts. You cut the fat. It's all meant to be there.
Put a pin in the idea of this being one giant orchestral piece, because I want to come back to that. There's a specific musical leitmotif. So we're gonna put a pin in that. Mm-hmm. And we're going to take a little side trip, a little vacation to prison, where all of us almost certainly belong. Bradley for your Funko Pops, me for just anything that I say online at all and in this podcast. And I don't know, Aeron is a history major, so that deserves prison.
Yep. Yeah, we shouldn't be allowed. We're the worst people at parties. As when I say like a recovering history major, the worst thing about studying history was the other people you study history with. Seriously. I double majored in psych. Those people were fine.
I believe this. But yeah, we're gonna hop over to Narkina 5.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
To Electro Death Prison. I could just see Bradley inhale and exhale like he's practicing his calming every time I speak. Just in, out. I will say my words of affirmations. I am a strong, powerful podcaster who can endure anything that my co-host says on the air.
I need to know what meditation apps Bradley has.
That brings us to our first ad, which is Calm, the app that I'm just kidding. Actually, if that's a real app, please pay us. I don't know.
Calm is a real app.
That is.
Is it? Crap, stop saying Calm. Stop saying it. Otherwise, they're giving them free advertising.
If there are any meditation apps out there that want to sponsor us,
there you go,
and pay us money,
they can be reached at.
You can find us at goldsquadrongays@gmail.com or on our socials, Twitter @goldsquadgays or Instagram and TikTok @goldsquadrongays.
Because here's the thing, who could really use some mental health care?
Everyone in the show.
Everyone in the show.
They have so much trauma.
But especially Kino Loy.
I have some thoughts about that.
I can tell you've been ready to go for a minute. What are your thoughts, Bradley, on Narkina 5 in the grand context?
So what's funny about this arc in Andor is this is the kind of stuff that I'm sure there's plenty of shows out there that you can come up with this, but sometimes shows like to do this where they do a random season. It's usually probably season 3 or 4, where they have their character do something completely by themselves for the whole entire season. And this is what this arc felt like almost. It's like, it's Andor goes to prison. Like, and that's the whole season. Like, they could have done a whole season where he was in prison. And that's what's so funny, because this feels like if this was a 5-season show, this is the 3rd season. Like, they threw him in prison for a whole entire season, and then it's his exploits in prison, and meeting all the random people that he's gonna eventually need later on in the rebellion when he gets out of prison.
The gang goes to prison. Cue It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia opening music.
I can't because it's copyrighted, but yes.
Yeah, we can't throw that. We have to be very careful about what we use in the context of the show. No, I thought it.
This is parody. This is not real.
I'm
off key. It's fine.
You got to change. I think it's you can have 7 notes identical, and then the 8th note has to be different because there's a musical motif in Wicked that's somewhere identical to Somewhere Over the Rainbow, except they've changed the 8th note to avoid copyright from MGM.
Oh, it's like, so that's how Vanilla Ice.
It's the Unlimited. My Future is Unlimited. That section of Wizard and I. I've been gay for a long time, by the way.
Yeah.
Oh,
you're older than me, so that has to be true.
No, I thought it was, certainly when we're talking about radicalization, and that's what the show is about, is the radicalization of Cassian Andor, from somebody who's just rebelling for the sake of rebelling to somebody who's rebelling for a cause. There's certainly like no real better way to demonstrate the absolute atrocities of the Empire than to look at how they treat their prisoners. And I thought that looking at this arc in the broader context of all of the arcs together, this is the darkest moment, and this is the moment that pushes Cassian to become a rebel for something greater than himself. We see that they're already working on a plan to get out kind of by himself, but the plan is only successful when everyone is involved in it and they have a leader in Kino Loy. And I think these are important lessons for Cassian to learn over the course of the season, although it is a fucking brutal stretch of episodes to watch.
The way that wraps up, the way that ends is Kino's speech over the PA to the prisoners. There's no way it would have, well, it probably could have worked, but Cassian is definitely someone who finds himself in the company of some pretty great leaders. And Kino's speech, specifically where he says, you're going to have to help each other. And you see like the prisoners like almost run into each other in the hallways with weapons and like stop, realizing they're looking at a fellow prisoner. They stop, they realize, and they move forward. And it was that moment that made me realize this whole time when they've been separating the prisoners, but putting them together in teams and squads and working against each other, they're still putting them together in squads, the same squad every day. And what do you expect to happen if you put men together like that, or people together like that? That is exactly what a military does. You have trained a whole group of people to work together as separate parts of a unit that communicate effectively. And you have created an army, you idiots. You absolute goddamn idiots.
One of the things too that I think it's Nemec says, it's either Nemec or Luthen. I think it's Nemec, is like pockets of rebellion all over the galaxy, whole battalions that don't even know they've signed up for the cause because they're disconnected from each other. And looking at this in parallel with like Star Wars Rebels or the Ahsoka novel, where some of the whole overarching themes of the rebellion in this era are there's pockets of rebellion all over the galaxy. Once they learn to communicate and support each other, then they can achieve the impossible of taking down the Empire, which is also why somebody like Saw Gerrera won't do it, because he's so paranoid that he can't work with other people. And I say this broadly as the character in this particular time frame is he won't work with other people. He's hostile to anyone that doesn't share his exact beliefs. And that's why he won't be as successful as someone like Mon Mothma eventually will.
Yeah. I mean, compromising, it's weak sauce a lot of the time, but sometimes you don't get things done without it. And God, it's his breakdown of like, what does he say? I am the only one like pure of purpose or pure of mind.
I am the only one with clarity of purpose.
Yes. How many conversations if you talk to your fellow progressives and try to agree on one thing. I'm not saying that there is an active political party out there that has this problem where they can't all agree on how to best do the thing that is not fascism right now, but they can agree, probably not fascism, but they can't agree on exactly how to do it, and thus nothing gets done.
I feel like we will see this in Russia, perhaps later on in the episode. I don't know if you're gonna get that far. Erin's just eyes went wide because she knew exactly who I was talking about.
Yeah. We're totally talking about something that happened in the past and does not happen. Has not happened since. It's been like about 100 years, almost 100 years nearly exactly, and it's never happened since. Certainly not in the nation in which I live in, and we're all good. It's all good.
Let me just log on to Twitter real fast and check.
I'm
sure everything is fine on Twitter.
I wouldn't do that if I were you.
Bradley only goes on his Twitter to occasionally retweet Funko Pop giveaways, and I feel like Bradley is the only person doing Twitter right.
I am no longer doing that because I deleted my account. So
really?
Damn.
Yeah, why stay on the burning ship? Like, just, the water looks really nice. So I'm just going to go for a swim while you guys continue to burn on the Twitter. You know what I mean?
It's really funny on the burning ship. I will say that.
So I figured
it's really hilarious on the burning ship.
Right. So you can no longer tag me in random tweets about the show because you can write my name, but I won't be on there anymore because I deleted the actual account. I did. I deleted it officially. So it's gone.
Unexisted yourself. You've deleted yourself from the record.
But Bradley, if you don't have Twitter, do you really exist?
I mean, if a Facebook falls in the middle of the woods and no one's around to see your profile, does it make a sound? I don't know, whatever that's a bad analogy.
An important philosophical question.
But I've been slowly deleting my Facebook too, because honestly, I'm kind of over it. Like, it's like, if you ask like my Gen Z sister, like, hey, like, can you go on Facebook and she's like, what are you talking about? Like, Facebook doesn't exist to this generation. So they don't have it.
I use Messenger still to talk to people.
Yeah.
Some people I only have them on Messenger. But I post on Facebook like once every 3 months at this point.
I look at Facebook to, communicate with my family on the other side of the country to let them know that, yep, our pocket over here is still alive, and that's it.
Speaking of dystopian nightmare hellscapes and family in questionable states of aliveness, the final 2 episodes. What did we think of the finale in the greater context? Aeron, I'll kick the ball to you to start.
I was never very good at sports or kicking things or catching things, as evidenced by this reaction. Yep.
None of us were. Bradley, you didn't even play sports, I don't think.
I just swam. I did like swim team stuff. I didn't do any of I didn't do contact sports.
I did marching band.
Same.
Not a sport.
I turned out fine. Okay. I turned out normal.
I allegedly did. Aeron, what did you think of the way the season ended? Then we'll bring it around to the end.
It just made me feel like this couldn't have gone any differently. This is exactly, this tracks. Like, all of this, like I feel like I saw it happening in many ways. Like, of course they're going to return to Ferrix. Of course it's going to end like this. Of course they're going to design a trap, but in the design of that trap, I wasn't expecting it to so completely eviscerate, I wasn't expecting the arc to so completely eviscerate Cassian's connection to everything that is not the rebellion. He really is left with no other choice, and he loses his family, he loses the connections that he had on Ferrix, and leaves his home in ruin once again. But in this particular time, everybody else is time has passed, he has changed, and so has Ferrix. The tension has ramped up, whereas it is fascinating to see just the process of radicalization happen in real time on a society. Like, this is a community. It's happening to a community, and we see it across all these different characters and all these different people. And the way that individuals, people seem to have like unplanned, like decided upon how, okay, fuck the police, fuck the Empire, I'm doing this, because of the thousands of cuts each of them have all received. It all hits a tipping point.
It's the tearing down, I didn't even realize this until I watched it today, but Marva, towers over the group like a ghost or like a statue or like a monument. And it's a monument to defiance. It's a monument to rebellion and Ferrick's independence. And we saw as far back as the flashbacks with Clem that that's very important to the people of Ferrick's. And so when Tigo knocks over B2EMO, in addition to making himself one of the most hated Star Wars characters of all time, what he's doing is literally trying to topple the monument to Ferrick's independence and resistance against outsiders. And in doing so, sets off the powder keg that is the people of Ferrick's. And then a fascist gets clocked with a brick.
Hell yeah.
And we
good
support that.
Shit. Good shit. Brasso is the only good man.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Bradley, what about you? What did you think of the finale in the broader context?
Like you kind of said, like they do the flashback in episode 7 of Clem. I was gonna say Cassian's father, of Clem, and how his kind of dealing with the they're not the Empire at the time, but it's the clones.
They are the Empire at the time, but yes,
the authorities.
The authorities. Okay, yeah. And it just shows us like this transition period from that point. Like we have the one arc to kind of break it up, but we don't realize that all this stuff is happening to the people during that time while Cassian's gone, and that it's just building and building and building. And when we see characters like Wilman Pack, like a kid, yes, building a bomb, and like that's how far this has gone, to the point of like the people are fed up, right? Even just someone as innocent as a child being who has lost everything, because as far as we know, he has lost pretty much everything. He's lost his father, he's lost his way of life, essentially.
When you binge, you really get to watch that all get taken away from him, because he's in the background in most episodes, and the scene where he they take his father away and he's like screaming at the troopers is horrifying to watch, like in the context of this is gonna mess this kid up. But it's like I said on our episode 12 review, our analysis, I was really glad he made it out. I thought it would have been easier to have him perform this narrative function and then get thrown to the wolves, and the writers chose not to do that, which I really liked.
I'm so glad he didn't die. And as I was watching the intercut of that with the flashbacks to Andor's dad, to Clem being lynched, essentially, the Empire did to this kid the same thing they did to Andor. They took his father away at this precipitous age when you're becoming an adult. And now your entire future is defined by the authorities have taken away something that's so precious and dear to you, and it was so very little to them, and they did it in such a horrible way. There's a reason why teenagers tend to rebel, and why rebellions tend to be run by teenagers or started by teenagers.
But before we move into the next section, I want to ask both of you, and then I'll do my own, and I'll start with Bradley. Final thoughts on the season?
Final thoughts. I think it was a great start. I'm actually looking at the critical reception of the episodes, kind of just like by critics based on like Rotten Tomatoes and stuff. I'm looking at like the different sections, and the show is kind of broken up of like episode 1 to 4 is kind of like in the same realm of positive review in like the 90s, and then you have 5 through 10 is like this solid block that people just seem to absolutely love, sitting at 100, and then it dips a tiny bit at 11, and then it goes back up to 100 at 12. So it shows you how the show like really like it introduces everything, grabs your attention really quickly, and then is just like, wait a second, wait 1 second, okay, here's the finale. Like, and then it does such a good job of that, and I really, really appreciate this show. It's definitely done stuff that Star Wars has yet to do. It's it's really mature. The politics is great. I think it's the best Star Wars show yet. It just in terms of matureness, and like it's a different funness to it, especially since It doesn't have anything to do with Skywalkers and, Palpatines, which is a nice kind of break from the original formula of most of these other shows.
He's in it, but not physically.
Right. But it doesn't have anything. The story doesn't necessarily have to do with him, which is nice. He's a piece of the puzzle, but he's not a major component of the wheel. And so I really like that. And I'm looking forward to K2SO. Bring on the robot.
Aeron, what about you? Any final thoughts you have on the season?
Boy, I'm exhausted. And so must be Cassian Andor. Just such a really good lead up to the next steps. As a Star Wars piece of media, this feels the most accurate to how humans operate in groups and societies, and how things go in real life when the same thing happens in real life that I think I've seen on screen. Because so much of Star Wars, it's a little bit for kids. We try to make it, a little less terrifying for, the kids. And this is very much like, we've taken the gloves off. This is how it tends to really go. And I just kind of feel like, damn, really love seeing something so well crafted and real feeling in this universe. It makes me go like, yeah, you can do so much with this setting. You can do anything with this setting. You have a huge playground in which to work.
I think that my final thoughts on the season are, this is exactly the Star Wars I want. However, I hope that the lessons that Lucasfilm takes from the success of Andor are things like the writing should be good.
Yes.
You should not be afraid to move away from the overt political themes of the franchise. You should have gay people in it.
Yeah.
These are the sort of lessons I would like them to learn. I hope they don't think, Star Wars necessarily needs to go darker, because I think this is about as dark as it needs to go. I think that this is my personal opinion, any Star Wars that does it, that you can't at least show to an older child, it's not good Star Wars. If you can't show it to like your 13, 14-year-old at the very youngest, then I think it really isn't Star Wars. So I really hope that they take the lessons of the good writing, the political messaging, the diversity of the cast, the care and love that the writers and the story team and everybody showed, bringing their A game for it. Because if they can keep pulling things out at this level, both in terms of TV and the films, we're looking at a really great age of Star Wars storytelling. And I personally am really looking forward to season 2. I'm looking forward to K2SO and the snarky robots. And I'm looking forward to finding out more about the planet-killing super weapon from the Stinger. But you know who? You know who is not building a planet-killing super weapon, Aeron?
Oh, I don't know, Charles. Who possibly couldn't be?
Oh, well, I'm certain it's not the products and services that support this podcast. I am almost certain that Anchor is not building a planet-killing death weapon.
In order to, reduce their costs. You put together a company and what you do is you have it separate from your government, so you don't have to personally pay for your military to go and take over an area. And anyway, this all started out as trade. This all started as normal free trade stuff, all kosher stuff. You send a few guys out to meet with a few guys in another place and hopefully trade some things. We want some things from this other part of the world. And here's the thing about travel, it's very dangerous, so you want to bring some guys with you,
and those guys should have guns.
Absolutely, and that works. Britain does a lot of this. So there was
Britain is the villains here.
Britain is
colonialism is the villains here.
Colonialism is Britain's they just happen to be really good at it, is the thing. So like you said, the Dutch East India Company, all of these European powers, they want to get in on the rest of the world once they've really perfected this technology of moving around places, because Europeans are only good at one thing, and that's trying to leave Europe.
I can't blame them.
The weather's terrible, the food's bad. Full offense to Europe.
And I will ask too, this notion of I'm a corporation.
Mm-hmm.
I want to maintain my property or my people or everything working and making money. So now I have to have some guys with guns.
I gotta have some guys with guns. Yeah.
So we see in the first 3 episodes of Andor the relationship between Marlana One and the people of
Yeah.
Ferrix, to where Ferrix is a sort of outlier that's technically
Yes.
under the corporate authority.
I have so many questions about the origins of Ferrix. I have so many questions about, like, because they obviously have this culture that is older than what I would expect, because I kind of assumed for a while that Ferrix was like a settler society. It does not necessarily, if it is, it's old, because they have traditions that are very unique to them, and it is not something that the corporate authorities were really into, but that is true to life. You asked about mining towns. As the American West was settled and as coal became necessary for the industrial machine, chunks of the United States are carved out, and we start mining. That's how, as various European powers worked their way across these continents here that we're on, they also pivoted to, silver's here, let's force people to work here. And in the United States, these were not run by the crown, because we don't have a crown. These are run by corporations. These are run by corporate authorities, because the guy who owns a mine. This is the Gilded Age we're looking at, if you're vaguely remembering your American history. And this is the same period of time where we start to see,
this is the early 20th century. Yes,
we're getting
late
there.
19th, early 20th.
Yeah.
Okay.
As industrialization, as soon as we need coal for steamships and for trains.
Okay, so late 19th.
Yeah, and all across the planet, places that are rapidly industrializing, including the United States, but also in Britain, also in France, also in Russia, even in just everywhere. The way that labor is done has changed, and you're trying to build something that is so huge. Industry is so huge.
So these companies come in, and they basically, throughout history, through the entire history of colonialism, but particularly in the Gilded Age, so late 19th, early 20th century, when they more need these labor towns essentially to fuel the machine of capitalism, particularly in the Industrial Revolution, these companies come in and they set up these places for the workers to live, and the workers support them. And when there's issues, the companies have their own people with guns. And we also see that in Andor too, with the corporate security. And as have been referring to them, the Space Pinkertons.
The Space Pinkertons. And the Pinkertons are an interesting example here, because they're not a branch of a corporation or anything like that. They're not part of a mining corporation, for example. They're part of a detective agency. They're a detective agency.
And we must speak of them in the present tense, because they still exist.
They're you might call them security guards, but what they really got their start as was mercenaries. They're mercs. And the first time I ever learned about them, on an academic level, was learning about their involvement in aspects of the Civil War. And my history books did a very good job of painting over all of the labor movements that they crushed, including like you mentioned, the Battle of Blair Mountain, one of your past episodes. And it's a good example of how a labor uprising, like in this case, Blair Mountain, it's an area in West Virginia, before and after World War I, there's rising tensions over pay for miners and the horrible system in which they were all living in, where your town is run by a corporation. You shop from a company store, you live in a company house, everything is provided by the company. And if you do not do what the company wants, if you are fired from your job, you have nothing. You have absolutely nothing. It's like they own your world. And that is what we see here with Ferrix. And a lot of those labor uprisings, of which Blair Mountain is just one of many, they tend to start off by somebody kills a mine boss or kills a guard. One of them shows up dead, and we're not sure how, but it seems to have happened. And these things are sometimes precipitated by things are getting slowly worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and people snap and break, and somebody just turns around and okay, I'm throwing a brick now.
Because part of the issue in episode 3 of Andor that they run into is Cassian goes and does this thing, and he kills these 2 corpos, and he runs home. And the corpos, the guy who's in charge, Chief Hind, has the correct opinion, which is, well, these 2 guys just went and got themselves killed. But Cyril wants to be a dumbass and show up with 13 guys, 13 of the space mall cops,
fucking
2
Cyril.
Ferrex. Fucking Cyril shows up.
This shitty little incel. Cyril simultaneously, obviously he's our skinny little Inspector Javert, but also, God, reminds me of so many guys I went to high school with. Dear God. Not in a good way.
He's our shitty white boy.
Very shitty white boy.
But he kind of, shows up with these cops, and part of the tension with the people of Ferrex, Cassian and Luthen do most of the killing.
Yeah.
But Brasso does murder a guy. And they essentially, it's from the way that the Ferrex people talk, they're not used to the corpos coming in. They mentioned that they haven't seen blues in a long time.
They leave us alone.
They leave us alone, and the fact that they're not leaving them alone has started the process of inflaming tension. And of course, then the Empire comes in and revokes the charter and is like, hey, we're taking over now, which does segue us into the Aldani arc and Joseph Stalin.
Okay, that's a way of going about that. All right.
Well, I mean, I'm just really excited to hear about Joseph Stalin.
So yeah, the Aldani arc. You need money for a revolution. You got to start off with something, obviously. And I loved the character of Nemec. The character of Nemec is so valuable in this for encapsulating the theory behind the action that's happening on screen, because once they introduce Nemec and Skeen, because I am the weirdo that I am, my interpretation of that, because they kind of introduce them together, they're kind of seen together a lot of the time, and my interpretation of the 2 of them was, oh, these 2 men represent the dual aspects of the revolutionaries who in Russia, both in the 19th century and the early 20th century, 2 different generations aiming to do the same thing, kill the Tsar. 2 different aspects of those kind of people. A lot of them were a bunch of criminals, and a lot of them were a bunch of students. And sometimes they were both criminals and students. Stalin is one of those people. He was a reportedly very, very, very good student, and he went to seminary apparently, and had a very bad time. Did a lot of reading of books he wasn't supposed to. Apparently a real great poet, and he was a gangster essentially. In his chunk of Georgia where he was at,
To clarify, real fast, when we say Georgia in relation to Joseph Stalin,
the country,
for our audience who may not be historians, when we say Georgia, we are referring to the country of Georgia, not the state of Georgia. Sorry, I needed to clarify that for Bradley and for our non-historian audience.
And the fact that he was from Georgia is a big part of why he gets involved in a revolutionary movement against Russia, because Georgia at this time is kind of an invaded, is a subject of Russia. When he is in school, they are stamping out the Georgian language. They are forcing students to speak in Russian, not in Georgian. That is a classic tactic of colonial powers. It's the exact same system, and he really chafed against it. And part of that is the culture of the area. There were a lot of people in that area that felt very strongly about their Georgianness. I wish there was a better way to say that.
Interesting that you should bring up the stamping out of indigenous cultures, considering what else is happening in this episode.
The Aldani arc was so painful in those moments too. I mean, good writing. They're writing it this way for a reason, to make it clear just how evil this is.
What did you bring up to me? Because I thought Scottish initially, but you brought up, I think...
you were right.
Somewhere in South America as well?
Here's the thing. You were right. After watching when Aldani is introduced, and we don't see any of the people there yet, we aren't familiar with the culture yet, and all we see is they're out in the mountains, and they got ponchos, and there's goats, And my first thought was barren, mountainous-looking landscape, Patagonia. Aldani, it's a far away from everything, but it's still close enough to everything that you can use that as a stopping point.
That was interesting to harken back to, just all sorts of places that have been colonized. And then they talk about, like, in depth in the episode, they talk about, like, the steps that they are taking to gradually phase this local festival out, because they know that if they just immediately crack down and ban the local festival, that's going to cause outrage. But they very methodically go through, and they've whittled it down to such a tiny group of devotees that when they do outright ban it the next year, which is what they were planning to do before the robbery happens, that they won't be as upset about it. I want to come back to that robbery and specifically Joseph Stalin.
The important thing to know is that it happened and it was true to character, and that he was a gangster for the Bolsheviks, essentially. He was Lenin's guy that, if you need a bad thing done and you want to get it done, you give it to this guy, which reminds me of some other character dynamics in Star Wars that I won't get into, but because here's the thing about the lead into the Russian Revolution and the fall of Russia, I see aspects of that conflict in both the actions of the rebels and in the actions of the Empire as they rise, as the Republic turns into the Empire, because of the nature of, because the Bolsheviks are pretty bullshit. They're, as it went down in real human history, terrible things, because people are complicated.
That's one of the overarching, like, themes as far as Andor and Rogue One is looking at the side of the rebellion that is not doing the nice heroic things, that are not like running around bringing back the Jedi and swinging the laser swords, but the people who are doing, like, the murder and the robbery and the violence.
I would like to finish on the fact that in real life, the people who won out in the conflict of which faction is going to rule Russia were the Bolsheviks. Bolshevik means majority. Their opposition, they were part of a couple factions of the Greater Social Democratic Party of Russia, which once the Tsar is overthrown, there's a provincial government in place. They're picking and choosing, okay, how do we want to run a Russia? And the Social Democrats are up in the front, like, we're gonna do it, we're the guys that are gonna inherit the show. And you have two options. You have the majority and the minority, Bolshevik and Menshevik. That's just what they translate to. And the group that lost was the group that thought, I think we should let people share how they think that we want to run the country and share their ideas. And we should pick and choose from what those people want and give everyone a voice, maybe, and go from there. And the group that won were the group that said, no, absolutely not. We don't need to hear your opinions. We need to preserve the true political spirit of our enterprise by having a select few a part of the party of Vanguard, who are the only ones running the show and the only ones who will benefit. They were the ones who won. In theory, if you're a weak sauce politician who doesn't, take the progressive choice when it's offered to you, and you stay in the middle and the moderate and never push forward,
you get a first order.
Both of you, yes,
you
absolutely.
Get a first order.
You get a first order.
That's ultimately what happens. Is Mon Mothma winds up, she becomes the Chancellor of the New Republic, and she's, a very popular chancellor, and she does a good job of trying to put things back together, but she makes some choices like not having that strong of central government and disbanding the rebel fleet and not enforcing policies super well and not prosecuting the former Imperials as hard as she should have. And so we wind up, you can already see in the bones of the show, Mon Mothma is going to be the one that wins out to be in charge. And we almost kind of see where that goes, particularly when we get into seeing other people like Saw Gerrera later in the series. But speaking of Saw Gerrera and the Narkina 5 arc, I do want to transition us away from some of the stuff in Aldani into let's do the announcement episode if you happen to have anything from that, and then talk a little about the Narkina 5 stuff. Anything you saw that was reminiscent of things that it's okay to discuss. because I was having some conversations with people about historical labor camps. And
Oh boy.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Oh boy. Yeah. I could jump immediately into historical labor camps, but the thing that vaguely ties to this that kind of tickled me was I don't know if you guys mentioned it in your episode on announcement, but the scene where Cassian is like, packing up his box of stuff in the shower and he's chatting with the girl who's in the next room and she's like asking him to go to the store and get the stuff. I had to look up what the things they were mentioning were. What was that? Was that Peebles?
It's like some kind of, it sounded like some kind of candy. I didn't look up what it was. I know
I looked up what it was.
You looked up what it was. You're going to tell me what a Star Wars thing is.
I don't remember the name. I should have prepared for this, but I'm going to tell you what it is because I looked it up, and according to Wikipedia, when I looked at it, according to my fallible human memory, it is illegal amphetamine.
Wow. What?
That's what I swear. We
basically spice.
She sent him out for space amphetamines.
Yeah, he sent him out for bennies.
Okay.
At least this is what I remember from Wikipedia. It could have changed. It could have all been a dream. I don't have it in front of me right now.
We'll have to call it spice so we don't get demonetized on other things.
I'm going to double check.
In historical context.
I'm going to double check your work here.
Yeah, in historical context. Speaking of historical labor camps, the Nazi war machine would not have been possible without the assistance of some legal amphetamines, at least that were legal in Germany at the time.
Yeah, no. Pezos were a form of legal stimulants that came in the form of pills.
Yep. I thought, I was just like, wait a minute, Pezos?
And
that
we
sounds
like
like
she sent them out for uppers and booze.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the prison labor complex, because that's sort of the heart of these episodes.
Yeah.
Do you have anything on I know the history of prison labor is a lot.
It is a lot. I'm gonna try to consolidate my thoughts here because, I mean, obviously the Gulag system, which that's the Soviet system, but it was inherited. There was an existing system of prison labor camps that operated in Russia for the century prior to that. And one of the reasons why they end up with a revolution in the first place is because a bunch of young intellectuals get sent to prison starting in the 1850s and didn't have a good time and are faced to do hard labor, because you guys mentioned penal colonies, I think, in your episode.
Australia and other
one.
Penal colonies that they would just like ship people off to, because that's
incidentally the other Georgia.
Also the other Georgia. Yes.
One.
Did you know this, Bradley, about the state of Georgia
being a labor camp?
They used to ship convicts to the state of Georgia to work. I know it explains a lot.
It didn't last super long. It didn't last super long, to be honest. It turns out that eventually transformed more into the indentured servitude system. And I will not get into the reasons why Georgia decides to pivot to a different source of labor. That's a whole podcast in and of itself, full of horrifying things. But yeah, the thing about Russia is that, and I really, one of the reasons why I keep harkening back to Russia, not going straight to like, let's talk about the Nazi labor camps, because Russia, I feel like, is just a great comparison for the Galactic Empire in general, because it's big. It's really big. It's like the Texas of the world. It's just really fucking big.
Well, we also see in Rogue One too the stark differences between various types of labor camps.
Yes.
Because Narkina 5, the intention of Narkina 5 is to build components for what we find out is the Death Star.
Yeah.
Whereas the purpose of the Wobani labor camp in Rogue One is to kill the inmates. The point is to work the inmates to death. So there's also like historically different kinds of labor camps depending on what the governing body that had set them up wanted to do.
Yeah, and the reason why there's a differentiation, because you can use the word when we talk about Nazi Germany and their specific choices, we use the word concentration camp, and because it is, and the better term is death camp most of the time. What's happening there, they want these people to die. This is their way of killing whole populations. But historically, that hasn't always been the goal, because labor is a resource to capital. And so other empires, the way that they've done it has tended to be, okay, we're gonna ship you over here and you're gonna do hard labor in Siberia for 5 years. And that becomes a brewing ground for revolutionaries. You send a bunch of, angry young men over to desolate farm in the middle of nowhere to just do hard labor and do terrible things to them. It was absolutely terrible in the Russian winter. Then boom, you're just going to brew a revolution. And on the other hand, you have just the machine of death. The machine
it's
of
just
death
not a fun time for anyone.
I did not have a fun time watching those episodes. It was
no one did.
The fact that they mention the episode, like as he's being introduced to the prison, like you might notice that this is a little different from some prisons you've been in. And it's different from, a prison as a detention center. It's different from, say, a death camp. They are trying to work towards a goal. They want them healthy, more or less. They want them operating. They want them to complete a task. And the Nazis also did do that. For example, I believe it's pronounced Mittelwerk. It was an underground facility that was used to produce the V2 ballistic missiles during World War II. That's where Werner von Braun, I think,
rocket guy,
his rocket guy,
Nazi.
If rocket Nazi
history,
got us to the moon.
Rocket Nazi guy.
Guy.
This is Rocket Nazi guy.
Rocket Nazi guy.
We would eventually poach him in Operation Paperclip, which I have mentioned on the show before. We poach him in Paperclip, or do we poach him?
It's Paperclip.
It is Paperclip we get him?
I believe so.
I had mentioned Paperclip, but I can't remember, Bradley, in what context I mentioned Operation Paperclip. You have the memory of a twink goldfish. It's fine.
Oh, Bradley. Your face. I'm so sorry.
No, and I thought that was interesting to look at the different, types of historical labor camps, particularly the ones in like Russia, where they would sentence the people for however long they wanted them.
Yeah, because the point was not necessarily like, and the point with a lot of those, they're doing the job of exile, but they're doing it within their own territory because Russia is big. They want you out of their hair. And a lot of the time that is what happens in this particular. The first thing, as I was watching them make these component parts, I immediately thought to myself, what was the name of that goddamn facility that the V2 missiles were built in? Because that was what I knew off the top of my head. That was an example of this type of work. And here's the thing, more people were killed building those missiles than were ever killed by those missiles. They were extremely dangerous to build. That's why you want people that you consider disposable making them. It's dangerous work.
And speaking of people that are considered disposable, let's transition into our final 2 episodes here. What a segue. This is a great show. This is a really happy show.
I hate it.
Let's segue into the final 2 episodes. The build up and then the riot on Ferrix. I'm just going to broadly ask, what do you have from these episodes? Like from a history standpoint, narrow down, because there's a lot that you could do.
There is a lot I could do.
I don't know how you're going to narrow down revolution, but go for it.
So those final 2 episodes are where we get to see on the individual level what Saw Gerrera was kind of talking about. He's listing all these different groups that are all ostensibly on their side and that all disagree with each other. And you see now Ferrix, the people of Ferrix care about each other. The people of Ferrix are a community. And so they bring it when they are really pushed under the boot heel as it is. They react in a way that is painful to watch, but just wow. When it comes to revolutions that topple something from the inside, because I do keep hearkening back to Russia, partly because this is the fall of an empire that comes from the inside. Politically speaking, the empire looks a lot more like, say, the Nazi Germany. You've got a rise to power of one guy, one faction. He runs it for years in a row. And in Star Wars, there are people who remember the before times, before the empire. Now, in real life, Russia, it's an ancient apparatus. Nobody remembers consumers before the Empire, but it falls from the inside because World War II was an exterior conflict. Nazi Germany had to be taken out, and Russia, the disparate factions within Russia pulled it down from the inside because they couldn't take it anymore. And that's what we're seeing in the final episode on a very small scale. This is one community, and that happened all across this 1/7 of the globe, primarily in I was talking about Stalin earlier, Georgia. That's one of those places, and it's all these different factions fighting with each other that don't necessarily agree. Sure, you've got the Social Democrats, the Leninists and Marxists, but they're also for brief periods of time working side by side with groups that say want a separate Ukraine, a separate Georgia, a separate Belarus. They all agree on one thing, and that's the emperor's got to die. The emperor's got to go. We want to end the system as it is.
And spoilers for history and the Romanovs, but Nicholas II, who is the last Tsar, does die. He gets shot to death in a basement.
He gets shot to death. His children it didn't necessarily end so quickly for them. And when the Aldani arc, when you see what happens to the wife and child of the guy running the show, that really made me go oh, this is painful to watch. And because this is where it gets morally gray, and things start happening where you're gonna hurt people that don't necessarily deserve it, but this is how a revolution or a rebellion looks like in real life, and something that has obviously happened behind the scenes this whole time in at least going based on this. We're being told this is what's been happening behind the scenes clandestinely the entire time in the lead up to the movies that we all know and love, that make us feel good and have a nice arc and ending and everything. But in the background, there's people reacting to each other and making short-sighted, cruel, or amazing decisions. People trying to help each other and trying to hurt each other.
Well, I was going to say that we also see too, in the back 2 episodes particularly, we see that Mon is willing to throw her husband and daughter under the bus to continue working with the rebellion to the capacity that she is. Which, she will eventually get more involved in the rebellion. But we also, too, see that Luthen is prepared to sacrifice Anto Krieger. He is prepared to basically force Lonnie to remain at the ISB when Lonnie wants to give the whole thing up. And even Saw, when directly confronted and given the chance to either warn Krieger or not, ultimately rationalizes it away and chooses to let 30 people plus Krieger die.
For the greater good.
For the greater good. So it's definitely looking at historical revolutions are very often, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but very often confederacies, successful ones, are confederacies of groups who maybe are not necessarily all on the same page. And a lot of times in the fallout from that, they'll end up either screwing each other over, or somebody's going to emerge. We see it in Russia when the Bolsheviks end up taking power, where they sort of emerge as the final decider. And we even see this at this early stage of the rebellion too. In these back couple of episodes, we're seeing the various disparate factions, and eventually the alliance to restore the Republic is going to be the only real faction in the game by the time we hit Rogue One in the original trilogy. So it's, and even the United States, it was a confederacy of the 13 colonies that banded together. And then unfortunately their disparate interests led to another confederacy.
It sure did.
That one was slightly less successful.
It sure did. And not just the separate colonies, the separate interests of the people within those colonies. Because immediately after the American Revolution, the United States, the brand new United States, had to deal with the fact that, oh, now you're the one collecting taxes. There were immediate rebellions after the revolution because all the guys who had just fought in the militias wanted to be paid, and the laws had to be changed over and over and over again over a period of 10 years to decide, what happens if Massachusetts explodes in rebellion? What do we do something? Do we do something? Do we care about up there or over there? What if an outpost on the western borderlands gets invaded? Does South Carolina have to care? And that only really starts to solidify when they face another exterior threat, which is the War of 1812, which people who know British history would not remember that at all because it's just a minor little like skirmish that happened during the Napoleonic Wars. But suddenly it's, oh, we're all part of the same group again. We're hanging out with each other again. We're fighting the same enemy again. It takes that kind of repeated working together to form a solid identity. But yes, you're correct. They all had disparate interests, including the groups within these what would become the states, because the people who were running the show they didn't want to pay their taxes. They absolutely wanted to collect taxes from people later because you got to run this government. And the people at the very bottom, no matter who's running the show, they're just like, okay, well, first I was paying taxes to Britain, and now I guess I'm paying taxes to this new system. And everybody who takes part in that conflict they have their own individual goals. They all have their own thing that drove them to get here, to make them want to be in that room. And as we see in the show, when we see, I'm so sorry, I have forgotten his name again. The kid,
Nimic.
Different kid. Kid with the bomb.
Wilman Pack.
Yeah.
Wilman Pack. We see Wilman Pack toss this bomb at a funeral.
I truly do not know if that was it. I assume that's something he decided to do on his own. I truly do not know if it was intended to have been. I don't know how much of this was planned as a group and how much of this erupted on its own due to everybody on that road like deciding, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I want to do this, and it all explodes. Obviously some of it is premeditated, but quite a bit of it is people individually reaching a breaking point.
Well, sometimes you see this happening too, and I'll sort of lead us toward our conclusion with bringing up that there are instances where things are very controlled and they're done deliberately by a rebelling body that's organized. And sometimes it's a priest got a bunch of people together and we're running around trying to find the king. I can't remember if this was happening during the French Revolution or I think this was the Russian Revolution, that a priest got a bunch of people together and walked up peacefully walked up and said, here, we want to petition the monarch about this thing. And the soldiers responded by opening fire. Or you get something like the Boston Massacre, where tensions were so high during the Boston Massacre that there were troops stationed, people started throwing things at the troops, and it ended up with 5 people dead. So you also have instances throughout history where the turning point of revolution has been the people got fed up with something or something happened, somebody pulled a trigger at one point, and everything just kind of blew up.
The number of times that happened just within the space of even the 10 years leading up to the Russian Revolution. Well, the Tsar's men fired on a crowd of innocent people again. And that kid, Wilman Pack. There's a specific kid in history that he reminds me of. Herschel, I'm gonna butcher this name. I don't speak Polish. Grichman. He was a kid who he was made stateless after he was a Jewish Polish kid who was made stateless and expelled from Poland, essentially. He ends up in France, and the Nazi decisions in the lead up to World War II are behind the reasoning for why Poland decides to render all Jewish people living that were born there stateless. And so if, you're no longer living in Poland, well, you're stateless now. You have no papers. Oh, no, you can't come back to get your papers because absolutely not. You're stuck in France now, and undocumented. Too bad for you. And so this kid, he assassinates von Rath in 1938 in Paris, because this is when the rest of Europe is still playing good with Nazi Germany and still doing the thing where they're like, Germany's just being weird right now, but it's fine.
The appeasement strategy. They're still doing that appeasement strategy.
And when this kid and why he did what he did hits the press, the rest of the world is like, so what? And very immediately after, the Nazis use this kid's assassination as a pretext to launch Kristallnacht. And then that hits the press. And everybody's like, what the fuck? Things keep... That is one of the decisions made by one person. This kid isn't planning this out with a group or anything. Decision made by one person that lights a fire on the international stage. Fucking explosive, kind of like throwing a bomb into a lump of artillery.
Well, Aeron, thank you for spending some time talking about the historical, some of the historical tie-ins, and thank you for coming on to talk about Andor. Before we do the pluggables, I had a note here that I'd said in the first little bit I wanted to come back to the musical motifs in the funeral march. So now I'm going to make you both sad.
Hey.
Are you ready to be sad?
I mean,
Marva's funeral march sounds a lot like the opening theme of Andor, and we hear some of the musical cues throughout the show Andor, and we also know that Cassian Andor dies at the end of Rogue One.
Yeah, here's the thing. As the show started, like that final episode started, I was like, oh, sounds like a band. Yeah.
So I think musically, this is all supposed to be like Cassian Andor's funeral march.
Oh, fuck you, Charles.
This entire show is just one big eulogy to Cassian Andor, who we already know is dead.
All right, where's the end call button? Leave. That's
a perfect reaction to anything I say. Well, Aeron, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking to us about all of that lovely historical overview. I know that we barely even scratched the surface.
That's the thing. I definitely got some things wrong and skipped over some things. And you know what? This is why I didn't become a history teacher. Like, obviously, I'm not trained to do this, but and obviously, it's to, you know what? If you think, well, you missed some things, go read about them. There's podcasts about them. They're great. They're great. It's just so cool to see this happen, you know, on a Star Wars. Terrifying.
Yeah, you should never 100% trust every podcaster you ever listen to be 100% right about everything. We definitely don't have a segment called The Thing Charles Fucked.
Always question the man.
Question the man.
Or the woman.
Well, thank you for at least coming on and giving us an overview to where people know some of the historical stuff that went in, and also just talking to us about the show in general. Always
happy to come in and just like rant about, oh God, history is full of terrible things, isn't it? Isn't it great?
We didn't even get to touch on Tsar Alexander.
Ooh, oh yeah.
That's a thing for people to go Google.
Taken out at the knees.
Aeron,
don't Google that.
Do you have any pluggables that you want to plug for us?
You know, after this, you might want to find me on the internet. Don't find me. I have a feeling that anyone who wants to find me after this it's not going to go well. But if you want to find me, I have a Twitter. I don't use it often these days. For my own sanity. But also, I hear it's a burning ship that's
it is a
slowly
burning
sinking,
ship, and
which sounds fascinating.
And we will link that Twitter in our show notes if people want to give Aeron a follow. Well, Aeron, thank you so much again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bradley, we are doing next week. We are doing 3 weeks of what are we doing after this? We're doing something light and easy, right?
Yes, thankfully, honestly, we're gonna draw out a little bit of Tales of the Jedi. We're gonna do some small episodes, giving them their own breathing room, but also because they're already short enough.
And no TikToks for those. If you follow us because of the TikToks, no TikToks for those. I'm taking December. Those 3 weeks I'm taking off of doing those to give myself a break, because those TikToks are actually pretty labor intensive.
You deserve a Christmas off. I guess I'll give you that for once.
So hard.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Scrooge, for giving me Christmas off. I'm so grateful to work into the capitalist system that permits me to have some time to spend with my family.
No, but we'll squeeze
just pay
in
me a living wage.
You're gonna get Christmas goose and everything.
No, but we're gonna squeeze in Tales of the Jedi in December, leading up to our Bad Batch coverage in the new year. So we'll kind of squeeze it all in, and we'll just have to tide you over until Bad Batch comes out.
Which Bad Batch? I'm looking at you. We have you on our calendar. Do not change your fucking release date.
Don't fail me now.
Do not fail me now. You have a month to go. Do not fuck with me, Bad Batch. I am so tired of these fucking release date changes. This is how revolution starts.
They never set a date. They set a date.
Well, Aeron, thank you once again for coming. And Bradley, go ahead and run the socials.
Thank you for listening to Goldsquadrongays. Did Charles fuck something up? Send us a message at goldsquadrongays@gmail.com. Follow us on Twitter at Goldsquadrongays. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Goldsquadrongays. Subscribe to us on YouTube at Goldsquadrongays, where we post the podcast as well as exclusive content. Please join us next week and every week for more of Goldsquadrongays.
Okay, let me figure out how to. You can cut my
He
gibbering here. Thank you. Shout out to Bradley for just being so good at making whatever the heck it is that comes out of my mouth sound like it makes sense. I need that. I need that kind of editing in real time, like every day of my life. Seriously.